Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. My name's James Gallagher. I am a community manager at Keyword Studios, and I'm here today to talk to you about player feedback, specifically how to get serious about player feedback. So I'm going to start off with my presentation here. Let me find the share button. Yeah, so how to get serious about player feedback. This is a talk that I shared at DevCon this year, and I was asked to come back and present it again, but also make some changes because I appreciate that a lot of people watching this might be indie developers, people who don't necessarily have dedicated community managers like the companies that we work with. But before I get into the topic, my name's James. As I said before, at Keyword Studios, I manage a team of community managers and social media managers. We provide these services to video game clients, big, ranging from AAA to indie to mobile. And me personally, I come from a community management background. I worked at some companies like Rockstar Games, PlayStation, and Techland over the last 15 or so years. But community management, and this is basically the simplest definition of community management that I can think of. And what we do when we're working with players and working with communities is we try and build a bridge between the people who play the game and the people who make the game. And like any good bridge, the information should flow in two directions. So the developer is sharing information with the players, and then the players are kind of sharing their thoughts and their responses back with what we call feedback. And I talk about community management here, but this isn't always done by a professional community manager or community management teams. As I said before, I know that a lot of indie studios will be attending this event. And this is often something that's done in the development team. And we'll talk about some of the challenges within that here. But the key takeaway from this slide is that, and really what we're going to talk about throughout this talk, is it's really important to make sure that this bridge of information is clear in both directions, that you have a simple way to communicate with your players and that they have ways to communicate back to you. Now, when we talk about communicating with players, you may think that the most obvious place for me to start is by telling you how you should talk to your players, where you should do that, what kind of social media posts you should publish and things. But I think that really, if you want to have a better relationship with the people who play your game, then the best place to start is to get to know them better. As you may have heard the quote from Jimi Hendrix, which is that knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens. And this is really why I've framed this whole talk around gathering feedback, because I think before you even think about how to communicate with your players, it's great to develop ways to better understand them. Just like any real life relationships, you can have a better kind of communication, a better dialogue with people the more you understand them. And this thing of feedback, one of the reasons that over the years, it's become almost ubiquitous. If you see any developer interview or any game trailer these days, there'll always be that kind of message that we're listening to you and we want to hear your feedback. This is two examples from Dying Light and from Rockstar Games. I mean, these are two very, very big companies, very, very big games, but they're both saying a similar thing. They're saying that we want to hear what you think of our work. And crucially, we're actually open to the idea of changing our work based on what you tell us. And if you think about it, that's quite a unique position to take in the context of media and entertainment for the video games industry. You wouldn't hear of like a film producer or a musician publicly saying, we're listening to what you think about our work and we're going to change it. We're going to go back into the recording studio and we're going to re-record that song because you told us you didn't like one certain part of it. But it happens in games every day, and it's actually a very positive thing. And it's one of the things that has helped games become so incredibly popular, but also have this idea of communities being at the heart of them. So let's dig into that a little bit better. Let's dig into the benefits of understanding and listening to player feedback. So on the left of this chart, this is probably when we talk about listening to players' feedback, this is probably the thing that people think of immediately, and that is you're gathering data that you can use to improve the game. Or let's be more specific and say, make the game more popular. Because if you give people what they want, you think, well, then they'll be more positive about it. But I think that the most powerful kind of motivation for listening to players' feedback is to have a more meaningful dialogue with them. The reason that anyone joins your Discord server or follows you on social media is because they're into your game and they want to talk to you about it. They want to talk to you and they want to talk to other players. And if you just think at a basic level about having a dialogue or building a relationship with other human beings and gaining an understanding of that person or those people, it makes sure that you're not just talking at them. It means that you're actually having a dialogue. And in the middle, if you're able to have that more meaningful dialogue with players to understand their feelings and why they like your game, what they don't like, and also from time to time, you're actually able to take that and use it to improve the game, then that meeting in the middle is when you can start to get a really, really kind of very positive relationship with your community. If we want to look at a great example of this, I mean, Stardew Valley is obviously an amazing game. It's one of the biggest indie successes ever. I can imagine that a lot of indie developers, this is the kind of thing that they would, one of the ultimate games that they would aspire to emulate. But it's clear to me, looking at this purely from a community management or communications point of view, that the developer, Eric Barron, he has a very clear idea of what his players like, don't like, and what they want. And he's really transparent with his players. It's one of the things that's great to see. You know, if something can be implemented, then sometimes it happens, as was the case with the co-op mode that was often requested. But then sometimes if it can't be done, then he explains why. And the one thing that you'll never see from the Stardew Valley account is that kind of thing of like, thank you for your feedback. We'll pass it on to the developers. We'll see what we can do. That kind of quite dismissive response. But this approach has built up an enormous amount of goodwill, as you can see here, but as I probably don't need to explain because it's such a well-known example. Now, I appreciate that indie developers have a challenge on their hands when it comes to having the time and the bandwidth to talk to players while also working on the game. But one of the advantages that you do have as indie developers is that you are connected to the game. You do understand why some decisions can be made or can't be made. And you're in a great position, probably a better position than a very, very big AAA studio, to have this very transparent, direct dialogue with players. So my recommendation would be to really use that position, be as transparent as you can. Don't be afraid of responding to feedback because the benefits outweigh the risks. So in a second, I'm going to get into some kind of more practical examples of ways that we can go about gathering and analyzing players' feedback. But first of all, I want to do a quick breakdown here of two very, let's say, broad methods of understanding your players. So anecdotal, it's really just listening. It's really just reading through the comments, being in the Discord server, and just building up your own personal understanding of what players want. It's quite organic. It's in some ways it's less work because you can just, when you have a bit of free time, you can scan through things. But it's difficult to prove your findings, and there's kind of a potential for bias as well, because even us as community managers from time to time perhaps will, if there's a player that's particularly active, or a player that we particularly like or think is very knowledgeable or has good insights, then we may put more priority on their feedback than others. Flip over to the other side, then we can take a really analytical approach to feedback, and that is by really just trying to quantify what players are telling us by collecting and categorizing things in a more scientific way. It does take more work, and it can be a bit rigid in that when you categorize everything, you sometimes miss some of the nuance. So my advice is really just to have a bit of both of these. I mean, you should always be listening to your players in that kind of organic way of just reading through replies, engaging with people. But then from time to time, I think it's really helpful to take a step back and start to analyze some of this feedback, particularly if you're doing things like player surveys, where you want to kind of capture a moment in time. So I'm going to come on to this in a second, because first I want to show you an example of how, if I can find the right button, there we go. For this next section of the talk, I'm going to share with you a practical example of a more analytical way you could go about looking at your players' feedback. And what I've done here is I've chosen a game called Grindstone. It's a puzzle game on Apple Arcade. I should say that I don't have any connection to this game. I don't work with them. I've chosen it purely because I'm playing it at the moment. It's really good, and I looked at some of the player feedback that was being shared, and I thought it was quite a good example to use for this exercise. So what I've done is I've created a Google spreadsheet. There's no fancy tools in here or anything. I wanted to share a solution that was basically free, that most people can do without too many sort of technical limitations. And what I've done is I've grabbed a whole bunch of feedback from players. I've grabbed it quite indiscriminately. I haven't cherry picked anything here. This is just a dump of it's mostly App Store reviews actually. And I've put in here the date of the review, who submitted it. And this is the text from the players. Again, I've not edited this or anything. This is just what the players have shared verbatim, along with a link to the specific comment and where it comes from. And what I now need to do is go through and fill in these three sections here. So that's the sentiment. So I've got some drop-down menus here. And for the sentiment, I've gone with very positive, negative, and very negative. There are a few different ways of doing this. This kind of comes down to personal preference. I've seen some people do positive, negative, and neutral, for example. Or you could have like a score from 1 to 5, or a score from 1 to 10 even. Although I think if it gets too granular like that, like it's difficult to say like what's the difference between a 6 and a 7. You know, I think having a maximum of 5 of these is about right. And then the topic. So we've created, these are the topic tags that we use. They're quite generic. We find that they cover most games pretty well. If I flip over to this tab, we have a breakdown here, just to remind us exactly what these topics cover. But you could customize these if you wanted to take this approach. I've seen there are some use cases where, for example, if a game has a lot of characters, let's say then you may want to have more topics covering the characters. Like it could be like, character abilities, or character look, or skins. Anything these are all obviously kind of can be edited to be more useful to the person using them. But basically the task now is, once you have everything compiled into this spreadsheet, it's essentially what we've done is we've structured it. So once you have structured information, you can start to work with it in a more analytical way. So if I just go line by line with these pieces of feedback, I know that this first one, for example, it's relating to, in the game, when you finish a level, if you want to kind of refill your hearts, you have to go back to the tavern, it takes a few taps to get back. So basically it's a UI, it's a UI issue. So I have a topic there for UI, and it's one of those that it's not overly positive, it's not overly negative. I'm going to say negative just because it is calling out an issue with the game, even though the person doesn't seem very negative about the game. And then I have this one, which is constructive. I find this useful. And what I'm saying here, I'm going to say, yes, this is constructive, because the player has actually taken the time to give me a bit of information about what it is that's concerning them. An example of a not constructive comment would have been, the UI is annoying, and that's it. And they're not actually sharing any more information that we can work with. And so really, if I just go down this list, and I've actually finished one here. So it took me about 25 minutes. I just went down the list and I added all of these tags. And what I've got here now is a really sort of nice breakdown of, I can actually start to see, okay, this is what players are telling us, but then also this is the relative quantities, so I've added it, I've put them here in a few charts, so I can see, bear in mind, this is a game that I don't work on, that I don't know a huge amount about other than being a player, but just after sort of 30 minutes of work, I'm starting to get a pretty good understanding of what the priorities here are for players. I'm starting to see that, okay, almost 9% of players in this batch have issues with the UI. Many have about the gameplay as well. So, and I know that the gameplay comments, that as I went through them, were mostly around difficulty. It's a match 3 puzzle game, and you reach certain levels that are pretty difficult. I mean, I like that personally. I like it that it's a puzzle game that has some challenge, but a lot of players were calling out that they found that they got stuck. And then game stability is something that came up, and that was essentially crashing issues. There was some players that reported things with crashes. This is something you see a lot more in reviews, by the way. I mentioned that I looked at App Store reviews, and one of the things we'll talk about in a second is that there's some nuance to where reviews are posted as to what they tell us. You'll find that things to do with stability, bugs, and monetization tend to crop up a lot more in reviews than they do on social media and Discord. So this is our approach, just having a more structured way of analyzing feedback. What we also do, I mean, I put the graphs in here in Google Sheets because I figure most people know how to use that, but we also use Google Data Studio to keep track of these reports. You could do the same thing in Power BI or probably Tableau, I'd imagine, depending on what you use. And this is a nice way of looking at it, because what we can say is that, like, okay, let's think about the UI. That was something that popped up quite a lot. So we can, if for example, if I was working with a games company and if I took the purely anecdotal approach to feedback, as I said before, then I would say to them, okay, well, it seems like a lot of players think it takes too long to get back to the tavern to refill your hearts. But by taking this approach, I can actually say, well, these were the specific comments that mentioned it. I can say, well, these were the constructive comments, so I can extract these. And as a community manager, one thing that's really nice is that if there's a patch later on that improves the UI, then because I have this record, it's really, really simple for me now. So I could just go to these 6, and because I said, remember before I said I was going to grab the links. So now it's very straightforward for me to then go straight through to that specific review, and then I can just post a message saying, oh, thank you for letting us know. Just to let you know, we've tweaked things. You can now refill your hearts at the menu directly after finishing a level. Should make it a bit smoother for you. So hopefully that's all pretty clear. I know I whizzed through that pretty quickly. I'm more than happy if people want to kind of follow up with me after this talk, if they want to have a closer look at this or see how it could be used for their game. I'm going to flip back to my presentation just to sort of wrap things together. If I get back to the where I was. So we talked, one of the things that I guess that I got asked about last time I did this talk was around about, okay, how did you actually put all of those reviews and comments into the spreadsheet? It looks like a lot of copy and paste. And yes, you could copy and paste it. Obviously, it's a bit tedious, to be honest with you, to get to take something from someone like Discord or app reviews or social media and put them into a spreadsheet like that. But there are some tools that you can use to use this method in a more automated way. So if you're looking at social media, if you use something like Sprout Social or Hootsuite or Agora Pulse, those kind of social media publishing tools, then they normally have like a tagging function. So when you see a comment come through in your queue, You can add tags, and you could use those same tags that I used, remember, with like UI and gameplay and graphics and things. You could apply those in that kind of tool, and that will help you kind of get to the same outcome. Discord is a challenging one, but there's a service called Zapier, or Zapier, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. And they provide a bot, which means you can collect messages into a Google Sheet, or you can write a similar bot yourself in Python if you have that kind of skills. But essentially, you know, with all of these different platforms, there's usually a tool or a service that enables you to either export comments to CSV that can be plugged into Google Sheets, or do it in these kind of automated ways with these bots and sort of scraping tools. And these are the sort of things that we use just to help streamline things. And yeah, what to do with the feedback. So I appreciate that it's some of this is useful just for your own insights, you know, but then it's cool to think about then what do we actually do with the information that we've gathered with players. And as I've said many times during this talk, you know, as you gain the understanding of what your players want, then you can communicate with them much more effectively. And I think it really helps with that problem of thinking about what to post, because, you know, there's nothing scarier than a blank page, right? If you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to start a communications plan with my players, or I'm going to start creating my social media calendar, or whatever it is that you're looking to plot out. Your players' feedback is a really great starting point. So what I would suggest, if I was working on this game and there was the criticism of the UI, what I would do with that is I would think, okay, like, how can I now involve the players in the process of improving that? So for example, like, it's okay, like maybe I come up with some different mock-ups of different UI workflows, and then you can always take those back to the players and say, like, okay, which do you prefer? Would it be better if your hearts were automatically filled at the end of a level? Would it be better to have a quick link back to the tavern at the end of a level, in order to cut out a couple of clicks? You know, don't be afraid to include your players in that. Remember that Venn diagram that I shared, like you're having the kind of the bit in the middle, really, which was having the dialogue with players and also using their feedback to improve the game. If you're doing both of those, then you're going to start to sort of get a really, really good relationship. And, you know, a lot of games that we work on, PvP games, they obviously balancing is one of the core discussion topics. You know, once you've done this analysis of the feedback, you know, you could even share it back with the players and say, look, okay, well, we found that, like, we surveyed you, we found that, you know, 50% of you thought that this gun was overpowered. What do you think? Does this tally with your views? Again, it's all just kind of more fuel for the fire of conversation. So this is something that I added for this talk. I didn't, because when I did the DevCon one, I heard that this was all great, talking about the feedback, but there were a lot of indie teams that wanted some more kind of advice on how to actually engage with their players and how to talk with them. So I typed up some very sort of brief, very basic tips that I think is good to bear in mind. And I mean, the first one, don't try to be everywhere. And I think that's really, really important for if you don't have a lot of time. Like if you're also making the game and you're doing this dialogue with the community on kind of as not a side project, but something on top of your normal work, then you know, trying to have a Twitter account and a Discord server and a Facebook page and a TikTok account, you know, trying to have all of those things is a lot of work. Don't underestimate that, and you can end up spreading yourself quite thinly to the point where none of those channels gets the right level of care. You know, I think it's, at the end of the day, like, think about where your players are. Normally these days it tends to be Discord, so you know, it's better to do a great job on Discord than a sort of okay job everywhere, is what I'm saying with this. And that leads into to be great at one thing. there was a game, what was it called? Like a 2D game, something, Katana Zero, I think. And I was watching their Twitter account as they were kind of in pre-release stage, and they just posted screenshots with no text or anything at all. It was just screenshots with no text. And I thought that was great, because it's kind of, it's a way of showing the players a glimpse of the game. It was pretty kind of, didn't require a lot of effort, to be honest with you. You could just queue those up to be, and that was what their Twitter account was for. It was just like, this is just a feed of screenshots. That's just being great at one thing. You know, for you, it might be something different. It might just be that you do dev diaries. You do a dev diary every week, and you post it onto itch.io or Kickstarter if you're a Kickstarter game, or you post it to the Discord server. And that's all that you do. That's your only means of communicating with players, but you're really great at it. I think that Among Us did a great job of this, actually. On Itch, they posted some really cool dev diaries, and great. You know, it's, like I say, better to be really good at one thing than be average and try to be everywhere. Transparency is the number one thing that your players will thank you for. That is basically what players want from pretty much every game developer out there. They want human communications. They don't want to be brushed off with, oh, well, thank you for your question. We'll look into that and get back to you. We'll see what's possible. If their feedback is valid, then great. And if it's not, then it's fine to let them know why, or why it can't be done at this point. Setting boundaries, that is, I think, really important. And there's a few different ways of doing this. Again, it could be just, you know, telling your players that, you know, I'm online, you know, I'm you know, my hours for, you know, coming on the Discord server for chatting to you guys are between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. You know, other times I'll have my DM switched off, you know, just, you know, I think one of the things that causes fatigue with indie developers working with their community is this sense that it's just constantly on top of them all the time, and it's overwhelming. But, you know, you can set boundaries. That's fine. Again, if you're transparent, and if you have this, you know, really care about maintaining this dialogue with your players, and you start building a positive relationship, you do all the other things that I've mentioned here, then they will understand that you have boundaries too, that you're also working on the game. You can't be online for them 24/7. And yeah, arguments, just, they never turn out well. It can be tempting sometimes, you know, sometimes we have players that really kind of test our patience. Whenever I think about this topic of how to handle toxicity, how to handle people that are really aggressive with us, I always think about a French waiter, you know, in a sort of very fancy restaurant, a very posh, fancy restaurant. And I don't know why the waiter's French, but I think maybe that's a thing I've got from movies and stuff. But, you know, no matter how abusive or no matter how demanding the customer is, they always stand there, you know, very tall with their perfect suit, and this just kind of epitome of politeness and kind of unflappable. And that is really the position that you have to take. As soon as you start coming down to the level of people that are being unfair or aggressive or toxic, then it just doesn't go well for you or for anybody. So takeaways, we've come to the end, but I believe we're going to have time for questions afterwards. So I'm happy to sort of dig into this or anything else with you afterwards. But so when it comes to the feedback, you know, aim for a balance between anecdotal and analytical methods. You know, I would say kind of with the analytical side, even if it's just like once a month, so once a month, you put aside a couple of hours in your diary and you think, okay, I'm going to scrape the last 200 messages from our Discord server in the feedback channel. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to apply this analysis method to that. That's enough. Honestly, that's enough. This doesn't have to be a daily thing. It doesn't have to be a weekly thing. It's what you have time for. It's the key thing is the more you put in, the more you will get out. So obviously, the more comments and messages that you analyze, the deeper will be the findings. But I don't want you to feel like it's got to be a full-time job doing this. Remember that where the feedback is posted and why it impacts what we can conclude. So as I said before, if you're looking just at App Store reviews, you're probably going to see more feedback about bugs, and you're going to see more about monetization. I'm not sure why exactly, but people in reviews tend to talk about monetization more so than on community platforms. And when you're looking at these insights, think about how you can use them to have a more meaningful conversation with your players. So if, as I say, I'll come back to the UI thing again. Once you know that that's a point of frustration for your players, so you found out something interesting about these people, right? These people that play your game. So how can you then go back to these people and have a conversation about it? And if you can get the feedback into the game, it will deepen the relationship with your players further. So you found out the issue with the UI, you've used it to have a conversation with players, you've even had a bit of a brainstorm with them about what would be a good approach in order to improve it. And then further down the line, you've actually taken their thoughts and it's made it into the game. If all of that happens, then you are in a really sweet spot and I promise you, it will really, really help grow and deepen the relationship with your players much further. If you get to that point, then you're in a great spot. But above and beyond all of this, please just do what makes sense, and be human above all. I'm reticent to share too much about spreadsheets and analysis when at the end of the day, we're talking about human interactions. We're using these tools to help grow our human interactions with players, but we're not trying to replace them. So that's all from me for today. Like I say, I'll be around for questions, but thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you afterwards. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, by the way, if you want to discuss more. Thanks again.
And we are live with James.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi, James. Very nice to meet you. Sorry it's online and not in person. Thanks a lot for joining the event. That was a great lecture, by the way. So, and you can always tell it's a great lecture when you have like a flurry of questions popping up.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer any here or afterwards on Discord. But
yeah,
it's great to hear so many questions.
Let's take a couple of quick ones here, and then maybe you can cover the rest on Discord. So let's take one. How do you incentivize players to give feedback?
So there are, I mean, in a perfect world, the biggest incentive is that people want to make a positive impact on the game. And I suppose if you show that you're able to do that, and if you engage, then that is one of the more natural, organic ways to incentivize things. If that's not working for whatever reason, sometimes creating a moment around a certain topic can be another more organic way of incentivizing people. So if you were to post out to your players a quite specific question, like if you've noticed, again, this all comes back to understanding what players care about. So if you are with a game, let's say a game like Destiny, where players really care about the balance of the weapons in PvP, the balance of gear, that's one of the biggest talking points. So if you were to put out a message to players on social media, on Discord, all of the channels where you connect with them, and ask them something very specific, like, which handguns right now are overpowered or underpowered, give us your tier lists, ask people something very specific, because then that creates a kind of a buzz of conversation. Not only are they talking back to you, but then it prompts them to talk to one another. So giving them a prompt and something to engage around, again, another organic way of incentivizing. Again, if that's not working, then you can look at more, let's call like material incentives. It could be something like currency. So it could be, if you wanted to send out a survey, for example, to players, a lot of companies, especially if you're in like a closed beta test or something, and you really want to solicit the feedback, but you don't have a very large audience, you could always do something like send out a Google form and say that everybody that completes it we'll do a draw at the end, and one or two of the players will be chosen at random who completed the form, and they'll get some in-game currency or a t-shirt or something like that. I would kind of do those things in order. Like, can you do it naturally just by engaging? If that, can you then also, try to really drive that by creating a specific topic for people to engage around? And then following that, look for a more kind of material incentive.
All right. And another one, how do you deal with, situations, maybe business decisions, things that have to be done by the development team, but you already know that those things are likely to generate backlash and upset players. How do you manage those situations?
Yeah, we get those questions quite a lot. The unfortunate answer to some of that is that the good work needs to have happened a long time before. I think if you've put in the work before to build up real goodwill with your players, if you've been transparent with them, and if you've been communicative with them, then they may be more accepting of business decisions. If you haven't done those things, and then you have to make a decision, often I guess we're talking about things like monetization or changes to the game that make sense on a business level, but that won't be popular. If you haven't done that good work beforehand, you're far less equipped to try and turn it around at the time. But if you are in that situation, I mean, I come back to transparency. Transparency is difficult in some cases, but it is what players want. I mean, if we use that as our barometer, players want you to be transparent with them. Difficult to come up with a silver bullet for every single situation, but you have to at some point come back to try to explain to the players, first of all, this is why we've made the decision, and the more detail you can give on that the better, in a way that's going to be they're going to understand. If for example there are games that I've seen in the past that have kind of dwindling player counts, and the developer has done something, maybe they've gone free. This has gone free to play, for example. This is a case that we see. Actually, you get a lot of early access games. They are paid titles, player counts start to drop, so then they decide to go to a free to play model. And then in that situation, I think you could explain to players. You say, look, we appreciate that you've invested in the game. We want more players in order to keep, so that to keep the game active for everybody's benefit. And I've seen cases where you can look at some sort of compensation packages for the players that did play. Have a conversation with players around what that would be, what they would expect. But yeah, I think it's got to be. You've got to try to understand. You've got to take time to understand what their concerns are, and then just try to be as transparent as possible and as human as possible. And if you've been regularly engaged for a long time, then that will be much easier.
All right, James, thanks a lot. A couple more questions for you on Discord if you have some time to stick around. Really appreciate your contribution to the event, and let's stay in touch.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks for the time. Have a good event.